and let's go on an adventure together.
Welcome back, my time-travelling friends, to this, the fourth location on our virtual tour of Tudor London. During our last adventure in time, we explored the ancient priory of St Bartholomew the Great, and today we have walked little more than half a mile northeast of the priory precinct to visit another great religious institution of Tudor London, perhaps one of the most famous of them all, the Charterhouse. To reach the Charterhouse, we must make our way across Charterhouse Yard, which in your time, I believe, is called Charterhouse Square. But here today, the wealthy and titled of Tudor London jostle for space. Amongst its most famous residents are Catherine Parr and her husband, Lord Latimer. They live in a fine mansion. In your time, it is occupied by a building called Number 10 Charterhouse Square. Then there's Catherine's brother, William Parr, later first Marquess of Northampton. He is also resident, as is John Leyland, the topographer and the King's antiquary. He lives in a tenement adjoining Lord Latimer's mansion. The French and Venetian ambassadors had houses in the square too. Back in 1533, Jean de Danteville, who appears in Holbein's Ambassadors, lived there, as did his successor Charles Solier, who was also painted by Holbein. On the north side of the square, a building of substance dominates. During the early Tudor period, before the dissolution of the monasteries, this was the Charterhouse, one of only 9 Carthusian monasteries in England, and by far the most prestigious. Did you know that there was an enormous cachet associated with becoming one of its brethren, and many a man has given up other ambitions to be there, even as a lay brother? Although the Carthusian order was renowned for demanding that its monks live a life of solitude, simplicity and silence, do not be taken in. The monastery relies on the patronage of wealthy and powerful individuals, and there are records that monks lived a very comfortable life. But more on this in a moment. But why is the Charterhouse Yard so popular? Well, for one thing, it is within easy reach of the city, while a journey along Fleet Street and the Strand brings you to King Street, in your day known as Whitehall, and the epicentre of court life in London, the Palace of Whitehall. Standing no more than half a mile to the north of the city walls and out of the press of the city, the Charterhouse and Charterhouse Yard was known for its good, clean air. And so, this place was a convenient location for the aspiring courtier, but also a pleasant spot away from the pestilence and the bustle of the city. Entering the yard from Charterhouse Lane, the Carthusian Priory lies ahead of you to the north of the square, while a medieval chapel and churchyard and stone cross are to your right. These were sited on the centre of a green and marked the fact that during the reign of Edward I in 1349, the yard had been a burial place for a substantial number of victims of the Black Death. And it was this cemetery that gave grounds for the setting up of a religious institution to the north of the burial ground. The building, which was to become the Charterhouse, was finally completed around 1420, and thanks to the generous patronage by the 1430s, had secured something that many inhabitants of medieval London could only dream of: running water, piped directly from high ground over Clerkenwell. But the monastery reached its zenith in the first 30 years of the 16th century under Prior William Tinby. It consisted of a particularly vast great cloister, which measured 340 by 300 feet, and around which all the key buildings of the priory were arranged, including the priory church, the chapter house, the frater, as well as the individual cells accommodating each monk. Whilst the order prized simplicity, solitude and silence, as I mentioned, the monks, as you can clearly see, enjoyed clean, orderly living, with running water to each cell. Now each cell covered 25 square feet and comprised of 3 or 4 rooms built over 2 floors. As you can see here, the kind of rooms you might expect to see inside include an entrance lobby, a prayer room, a sleeping room and a living room. Each monk also enjoyed his own secluded garden, a latrine, fire, candles and, as I have mentioned, running water, with fresh meals delivered to their door. Handicrafts rather than physical labour occupied their time, and these crafts included such things as bookbinding, writing and illumination, carpentry, weaving, or the study of topics such as medicine. Other manual tasks which enabled the running of the monasteries, such as brewing, baking and laundry, were carried out by the lay brothers, of which there are currently 18. The great cloister is a covered walkway connecting all the cells of the principal priory church and other communal buildings. The floor of the cloister consists of tiles laid diagonally and interspersed with memorial slabs marking the final resting place of lay men and women and other benefactors of the priory, similar to the one that you can see here at Norwich Cathedral. The church at the Charterhouse is used for worship by both the priory and the laity. It's 97 feet long and 38 feet wide externally, and as such is built on a similar scale to its sister house, another Carthusian priory in North Yorkshire, Mount Grace Priory, which you can see here. In the centre of the choir at the Charterhouse is the monument to the priory's founder, Sir Walter Manny, an alabaster tomb modelled on that of Sir John Beauchamp in the old St Paul's Cathedral, which you can see here. The prestige of the Charterhouse flourished through the first 30 years of Henry VIII's reign. That was until the king moved to divorce Catherine of Aragon and thereby breaking with the Holy Roman Church in Rome. A violent and ultimately bloody struggle broke out between the monarch and the holy men of the Charterhouse. Its prior, John Houghton, and procurator refused point blank to sign the 1534 Act of Succession, and as a consequence were briefly thrown into the Tower. In 1535, when it became mandatory to sign the King's Act of Supremacy, making Henry VIII head of the Church in England, Houghton and several others refused to bend to the King's will. They paid for it in the most gruesome way possible. John Houghton was the first to die, being dragged to Tyburn from the Tower in his religious habit, where he was hung, drawn and quartered. And it is even reported that as the executioner was about to rip open his chest and remove his heart, he cried out, "O Jesus, what wouldst thou do with my heart?" Other monks from the Charterhouse who also refused to comply were tied by chains to posts, hands behind their backs, and left to starve to death in Newgate prison. Some monks who remained behind at the Charterhouse understandably capitulated to Henry's wishes. After this, the priory limped on. The following year, the last prior, William Trafford, was appointed, but he finally surrendered the Charterhouse to the King on the 10th of June, 1537, although the priory did not finally close until the 15th of November the following year, 1538, when the remaining monks were evicted. However, my friends, this is not quite the end of our Tudor tale, for after this period the Charterhouse was used by the Crown for storage, notably as a depot for the King's tents. However, in 1545 the entire site was purchased by Sir Edward North. He was a creature of Sir Richard Rich, being a friend and fellow lawyer. Rich promoted Edward North to the Chancellor of the Court of Augmentations, and North subsequently built himself a new home on the site of the Charterhouse. It was renamed North House. North House has in fact been called a palace. It was certainly a splendid mansion designed to suit his habits, his tastes and his whims. One report even speaks of how he turned the church into a banqueting hall during the renovations and almost entirely overthrew the cloister. Sadly, almost nothing was left of this except a large open space that was used as a garden, outlined by the footprint of the original cloister. Sir Edward became Lord North during the reign of Mary I and continued to live at the Charterhouse. In 1558, just after her accession, Elizabeth I kept her court at the Charterhouse for 6 days between the 23rd to the 29th of November. It was a most suitable property, grand in status, lying just outside the city walls, but en route from Hatfield, where the Queen had learnt of her succession. Lord North then entertained the Queen a second time at his London home in 1561, from the 10th to the 13th of July. But he was to die there 3 years later, on the 31st of December, 1564. In fact, Lord North passed away the day before his Charterhouse home was due to be sold to the 4th Duke of Norfolk, Thomas Howard. Norfolk had already sold his other London home, Norfolk House in Lambeth, and was looking for another base in the Tudor capital. The newly named Howard House fitted the bill perfectly. Its size and grandeur suited the Duke's status. The house was away from the damp of the River Thames and the marshy ground that had surrounded Norfolk House, and it lay north of the city, en route to Norfolk's principal country home at Kenninghall. Unfortunately, the Duke fell foul of accusations of treason when he was seriously considering marrying the Catholic Queen Mary Stuart. A conversation on the subject was latterly recalled by the Duke's adviser, Lawrence Bannister, a conversation which indeed took place in the gardens of Howard House in May 1569. As a result, Thomas Howard was arrested and thrown into the Tower, but he was allowed out under house arrest and kept at Howard House. Unfortunately, unable to keep himself out of trouble, the Duke soon became involved in the Ridolfi plot to overthrow Elizabeth and place himself on the throne alongside Mary, Queen of Scots, thus restoring, or aiming to restore, Catholicism to England. Norfolk had already begun to embellish the building in preparation for this great event. The creation of the Norfolk cloister and possibly alterations to the great chamber ceiling date from this time. But the plot was uncovered on the 6th of September 1571, and Norfolk was arrested on charges of treason. On the 16th of January 1572, he was found guilty at Westminster Hall and was beheaded on Tower Hill on the 2nd of June. And so, my friend, we conclude our tour of the Charterhouse and its later reincarnations as North House and finally Howard House. But in your time, the remains of this historic building provides housing for a small community of men over 60, all of whom have given service to their country. There are tours of the Charterhouse, as it is once again known, and you will see features including the entrance to a monastic cell, the position of the original priory church, the monastic chapter house, now converted into a chapel, as well as the Tudor Great Hall and Great Chamber. And as you wander around the 21st century Charterhouse Square, it is certainly easy to imagine bumping into the Latimers arriving back at their London townhouse, or John Leyland, Catherine Parr's neighbour, leaving his home to set off on one of his many travels around England. Or just perhaps you might catch a glimpse, a ghostly glimpse, of the strapping figure of the ambassador Charles Solier, returning from his business at court. Ghosts of the past are indeed everywhere in this quiet London suburb. But we must leave this behind and head to our next destination. Let us travel back through the city, pass by Old St. Paul's, through Ludgate, down the Strand and via Charing Cross to explore King Street, adjacent to Whitehall Palace and the Royal Enclave of Westminster. I will see you soon, my friend, on our next time-travelling adventure.